The ridge was already lost when they laughed at her. The air smelled of hot dust and scorched metal, that bitter tang that clung to the back of the throat long after fear had settled into the bones. Men lay pressed into shallow scrapes along the slope, uniforms smeared the color of the earth itself, eyes darting between the collapsing tree line and the open valley below. The enemy had found the range. Every second felt borrowed, and in the middle of that breaking line she stood up. She was smaller than most of them, her helmet sitting a fraction too low on her brow, her sleeves rolled tight as if to keep the world from tugging her apart. When she stepped forward with the long, dark rifle cradled against her shoulder, someone snorted. Another shook his head, lips curling with disbelief that cut sharper than the incoming fire. Just a girl? The thought passed through more than one mind at the same time, unspoken but heavy, the kind of thought that came from old habits and old stories, from a lifetime of assuming who could hold a line and who would crumble under it. She didn't look at them. She didn't need to. From the moment the ridge began to fail, she had already retreated inward, into that narrow, disciplined corridor where fear was acknowledged and then locked away. Her breathing slowed. The world sharpened. The chaos thinned until it became geometry and timing. Below them, movement rippled through the valley like a living thing, shadows slipping between rocks, figures testing angles, confident now, tasting victory. They believed the ridge was finished. They believed the people above them were already ghosts. She lay down prone, the gravel biting through fabric into skin, a familiar grounding pain. The rifle's weight settled into her shoulder like an old promise. She adjusted the bipod with careful fingers, each motion precise, economical. The wind brushed her cheek, warm and steady, whispering secrets she had learned to hear long before anyone here had learned her name. In another life, far from this ridge, she had learned what it meant to be underestimated. She had learned how silence could be louder than protest, how patience could become a weapon. Those lessons lived in her muscles now, in the steadiness of her hands, in the way her eye found the scope without searching. The first shot broke the enemy's confidence, not with noise, but with consequence. One moment there was a figure advancing too boldly, rising from cover with the arrogance of someone who believed the fight was already won. The next, there was absence, a sudden stillness that sent confusion rippling outward. The valley hesitated. She chambered the next round without haste. Her pulse stayed low, a quiet drum she had trained herself to trust. Another target revealed itself in that hesitation, a leader perhaps, gesturing sharply, trying to restore momentum. The second shot arrived like punctuation. Above her, the laughter died. It didn't transform into cheers or praise. It simply vanished, replaced by a silence thick with recalculation. Men lifted their heads just enough to watch the valley change its mind. The enemy slowed, then stopped, then scrambled for cover they suddenly realized was inadequate. She kept firing. Each round was deliberate, measured, never wasted. She wasn't trying to terrify them, though fear bloomed anyway. She was shaping the battlefield, carving space and time for the people behind her. Every pull of the trigger was an answer to a question the enemy hadn't known they were asking. Who is holding this line? Minutes stretched, elastic and unreal. The ridge, moments ago on the verge of collapse, began to breathe again. Orders passed in murmurs. Wounded men were dragged back an inch at a time. Ammunition was redistributed. Hope, fragile but undeniable, crept through the dust. She felt none of it. Not yet. Her world was reduced to distances and angles, to the subtle shift of wind against her face, to the way the rifle spoke through her shoulder with each shot. She had learned long ago that emotion, indulged too early, was dangerous. There would be time later, if there was a later. A third figure tried to run. A fourth tried to hide. Neither succeeded. From the valley, frustration rose like heat. Shots cracked back toward the ridge, searching for her, guessing at her position. Rounds snapped close enough to kiss the dirt beside her face. She adjusted, rolled slightly, made herself smaller. The fear knocked once, politely. She ignored it. Somewhere behind her, someone whispered her name for the first time, surprised to know it. The line held. When the enemy finally withdrew, it wasn't in defeat so much as in disbelief. They pulled back cautiously, as if expecting the ridge itself to rise and pursue them. The valley emptied, leaving only the echoes of a plan unraveled by a presence they had never properly seen. She stayed prone long after the last movement vanished, her cheek pressed into the earth, her breath counted and recounted. Only when the silence settled into something trustworthy did she lift her head. The ridge looked different now, the same dirt, the same scars, but the air between the soldiers had shifted, charged with something unspoken and uneasy. Eyes followed her as she rose, slung the rifle and turned back toward them. No one laughed. They looked at her the way people look at a sudden storm that saved them from a fire they couldn't control, with awe tangled tightly with shame. She met their gazes without triumph, without accusation. She had learned, painfully, that respect born of spectacle was fragile. She didn't need it. What mattered was that they were alive, that the line had not broken. Someone opened their mouth, then closed it again. Apologies were heavy things, and not all of them were ready to be carried. As medics moved and orders reformed, she retreated again into herself, checking the rifle, cleaning grit from its mechanisms with ritual care. Her hands trembled now, just a little, the delayed tax of adrenaline. She let them. She had earned that small weakness. In the quiet that followed survival, memories crept in uninvited. The first time she had been told she was too small, too quiet, too soft. The long hours spent proving nothing to anyone, because she had learned early that the truest victories were private. This ridge was not the first place she had been doubted. It would not be the last. But as the sun dipped and shadows lengthened, the men around her adjusted their understanding of the world. They had watched assumptions fail under pressure. They had seen skill speak when prejudice fell silent. Later, when reports were written and stories were told, some would try to polish the moment into something simpler, a miracle, a lucky shot, an exception. They would be wrong. What had held the line was not surprise, or novelty, or the shock of seeing a girl where they expected someone else. What had held the line was discipline honed in obscurity, patience sharpened by dismissal, courage quiet enough to be mistaken for nothing at all. As night crept over the ridge, she sat with her back against the earth, rifle across her knees, eyes scanning the dark with calm vigilance. The wind cooled the sweat on her skin. The stars emerged, indifferent and steady. Somewhere, far beyond this place, there were still people who would sneer, who would underestimate, who would ask the question with a curl of the lip and a lazy certainty. Just a girl. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the rifle, the proof of the day's truth resting solid and undeniable in her hands. Then she opened them again and kept watch, the line unbroken, the answer already given. The night did not bring rest. It only changed the shape of the fear. Darkness settled over the ridge like a held breath, thick and watchful. The valley below disappeared into shadow, but she knew better than to believe it was empty. Absence could lie, silence could prepare. She sat motionless, spine against cold earth, senses stretched thin as wire. Every scent sharpened, the oil from her rifle, the metallic tang of dried blood, the faint smoke still clinging to uniforms and skin. Around her, the men tried to sleep. Some pretended well, others stared into nothing, eyes open, haunted by how close they had come to being erased. No one questioned was she remained awake. No one asked her to rest. They had learned, without being told, that vigilance lived naturally in her bones. She replayed the earlier moments not with pride, but with precision. Each shot, each calculation, each risk weighed again in the quiet court of her own mind. Survival did not mean perfection. It meant learning quickly enough to stay alive the next time. And there would be a next time. She felt it in the air, in the way the night refused to fully settle. Hours before dawn, the wind shifted. It was subtle, the kind of change only someone listening deeply would notice. The breeze that had brushed her cheek all evening thinned, then reversed, carrying with it a faint disturbance. Not sound, intention. Her eyes opened wider, pupils drinking in darkness, her body responding before conscious thought could catch up. Movement, low, careful, smarter than before. The enemy had not left. They had adapted. She adjusted her position inch by inch, slow enough that even the gravel stayed silent beneath her. The rifle came up, familiar and steady, an extension of her will. She did not fire. Not yet. Night was a currency, and she would not spend it cheaply. Below, shadows separated themselves from shadow. Figures advanced in disciplined silence, exploiting terrain, closing distance without haste. This was no retreating force licking wounds. This was a test, a probe meant to discover whether the ridge's earlier resistance had been a fluke. Behind her, a man shifted in his sleep, muttering softly. Another coughed, and then stilled, mortified by the sound. She felt the fragile line between safety and disaster tighten. If she fired now, she would give her elf away. If she waited too long, the ridge would bleed quietly. Her mind narrowed again, slipping into that private place where instinct and experience braided together. She counted heartbeats, measured spacing, calculated angles in near darkness, trusting memory and intuition over sight. When she finally moved, it was not to shoot. She reached back and tapped the boot of the nearest soldier, just once, firm and deliberate. His eyes snapped open, terror flaring before recognition calmed it. She leaned close, breath barely stirring the air, and murmured instructions so quietly they barely existed. A ripple of awareness spread, subtle and controlled. No shouting, no panic. Men repositioned like pieces on a board she had already studied. The first enemy figure rose slightly to signal, confidence creeping back into his posture. That was when she fired. The muzzle flash was brief, swallowed by night, but the impact was immediate. Confusion fractured the advance. A second shot followed, then a third, each one delivered with the same calm authority as before. But now the ridge answered, with restraint, disciplined fire that suggested far more defenders than truly existed. The illusion mattered. The enemy hesitated again, caught between memory and uncertainty. Had they misjudged? Had reinforcements arrived unseen? Or was that same unseen presence still watching, patient and lethal? She shifted positions between shots, never staying long enough to become predictable. Dirt brushed her cheek, cold and grounding. Her breathing stayed even. Fear remained present, acknowledged but caged. Minutes passed, then longer ones. Finally, the shadows withdrew, melting back into the valley without triumph or defeat. Only caution, only the knowledge that something on the ridge refused to be broken easily. When the sky began to pale, exhaustion crept in like a tide. She allowed herself to sit back fully at last, shoulders heavy, fingers aching from cold and tension. Around her, men stirred, awake now, watching her with an unfamiliar expression, not awe, not curiosity, but trust. It weighed more than the rifle ever had. As dawn spread thin light over the ridge, she cleaned her weapon again, hands steady despite fatigue. She did not look for gratitude. She did not wait for acknowledgement. What she felt instead was a quiet resolve settling deeper into her chest. They would test the line again, maybe today, maybe tomorrow, and when they did, the ridge would remember who had held it in the dark, when belief mattered more than brute force, and silence carried the sharpest edge of all. By mid-morning, the ridge wore a deceptive calm. Sunlight washed over churned earth and shattered brush, softening the scars just enough to lie. Heat rose slowly, drawing the scent of dust and spent casings into the air. From a distance it might have looked peaceful. Up close, every man knew the truth. Calm was only a pause between decisions. She moved among them with quiet purpose, checking sight lines, memorizing new angles revealed by daylight. The night's tension still lived in her muscles, a low hum beneath the skin. Fatigue tugged at her limbs, but she ignored it. Tired bodies failed, disciplined minds endured. Eyes followed her again, but differently now. Where there had once been dismissal, there was careful attention. Men adjusted positions when she paused. They waited when she studied the valley. Not because she demanded it, but because survival had taught them who to listen to. Down below, the enemy regrouped in plain sight this time. No more arrogance, no more careless exposure. They moved deliberately, forming clusters, testing range with sporadic fire that kicked up dirt just short of the ridge. It was psychological now, meant to fray nerves and provoke mistakes. She watched without reacting, letting the silence stretch. Inside her, another silence answered back, older, heavier. It carried memories of proving grounds and assessments where failure had been expected of her before she ever began. She had learned there that doubt could be useful if it belonged to others and not to her. She let the enemy keep theirs. A young soldier nearby wiped sweat from his brow, hands trembling despite the heat. He tried to steady himself, embarrassed by his own fear. She noticed. She always noticed. Without looking at him directly, she shifted slightly closer, her presence calm and unhurried. Fear softened in her wake. When the enemy advanced again, it was broader this time, a cautious wave rather than a sharp blade. They believed numbers might succeed where boldness had failed. She felt the weight of that assumption settle over the ridge like an approaching storm. She chose her targets not by proximity, but by influence. The ones who guided, the ones who watched rather than rushed. Each shot disrupted not just a body, but a decision. Momentum faltered, lines bent. Confusion spread in small, invisible fractures. The men beside her began to understand the pattern. They held their fire until it mattered. They trusted the gaps she create. Ed. The ridge did not roar. It whispered resistance. Incoming rounds struck closer now. Stone chipped, dirt sprayed, a fragment tore through fabric near her shoulder, grazing skin with a sting that bloomed hot and sharp. She did not flinch. Pain was information, nothing more. She adjusted, recalculated, continued. The enemy pressed harder, frustration bleeding into urgency. They wanted this ridge finished. They needed it finished. She denied them. Time blurred. The sun climbed, thirst gnawed, muscles burned. Still, the line held, shaped by restraint and precision rather than brute force. Each minute the ridge remained theirs rewrote the enemy's expectations further. Then, briefly, everything went wrong. A shout, too loud, too sudden, broke the careful quiet. A soldier further down the line panicked, rising to fire wildly. The enemy answered instantly. Shots snapped back with deadly accuracy, forcing the ridge to duck and scatter. For a heartbeat, chaos threatened to bloom. She acted without hesitation. She rose just enough to draw attention, firing in rapid succession, bold and unmistakable. The enemy's focus snapped toward her position, exactly as she intended. Risk flared hot and bright in her chest, but she accepted it. Someone had to carry it. Rounds struck dangerously close now. The earth around her exploded in small, violent bursts. She shifted again, barely escaping the range she had just revealed, and the ridge followed her lead, regaining cohesion in her wake. The panic dissolved as quickly as it had formed. When the firing finally slowed, the valley below lay scattered with doubt. The enemy pulled back once more, not in full retreat, but with the unmissed, acable body language of a force running out of answers. She sank back to the ground, breath finally hitching, chest tight. The cost of command, even unspoken, pressed down on her. She felt the weight of every life that depended on her restraint, her timing, her refusal to miss. No one laughed now. No one whispered. They watched her with something close to reverence, though she would never have named it that. She only knew that the ridge felt steadier beneath her, as if it recognized her too. And somewhere deep inside, beneath discipline and exhaustion, a quiet certainty took root. They could sneer, they could doubt, they could underestimate, but they could not pass. The final push came in the late afternoon, when the light grew slanted and cruel. It arrived without drama, without the frantic urgency of earlier assaults. The enemy advanced slowly, deliberately, as if accepting that this ridge would demand payment in full. They spread wide, testing every weakness at once, believing that pressure applied everywhere would eventually crack something open. She felt the change before anyone else named it. This was not a probe, not a test. This was the decision. Her mouth was dry. Her shoulders ached with a deep, grinding fatigue that no amount of discipline could erase. Still, her mind remained clear, sharpened by hours of restraint. She scanned the valley, not for movement alone, but for intention, where desperation gathered, where leadership strained to hold. Behind her, the men waited, not passively, not helplessly. They waited with trust, a fragile thing she handled more carefully than her rifle. She took a slow breath and let the world narrow one last time. First shot cut through the advance like a snapped wire. Then another. Then the ridge answered, not all at once, not wildly, but in controlled, disciplined bursts that made the enemy hesitate at every step forward. Progress became costly. Momentum fractured. Return fire surged, heavier now, angrier. The ground shook with near misses. Stone and dirt rained down. A round struck close enough to knock the breath from her chest, pain flashing white along her ribs. She tasted blood, metallic and sharp, and swallowed it back down. She did not retreat. Instead, she shifted her position by instinct alone, rolling into a pocket of cover she had memorized hours earlier. From there, she resumed, steady and relentless. Each shot was no longer just defense, it was declaration. You will not take this place. The enemy faltered visibly now, their formation loosened, orders went unanswered, the confidence they had tried to rebuild collapsed under the weight of repeated refusal. They had expected exhaustion, they had expected fear, they had not expected her to still be there. When the final withdrawal came, it was unmistakable, not cautious, not probing. It carried the unmistakable language of surrender to reality. Figures pulled back in earnest, abandoning angles, abandoning hope, leaving the ridge to the quiet it had earned. She stayed still long after the last movement vanished, her body trembling now that the danger had finally loosened its grip. The sky burned gold and red above her, indifferent to how close everything had come to ending. Slowly, she lowered the rifle. Around her, men stood in silence. Some removed their helmets, pressing hands to faces. Others stared out over the valley, absorbing the truth that they were still alive. None of them spoke to her right away. Words felt too small. At last, someone stepped closer, stopping just short of invading her space. His eyes held something raw and humbled. Gratitude, yes, but also reckoning. Others followed, not crowding, simply standing near, as if proximity itself mattered. She met their gazes calmly, without triumph, without bitterness. She had never needed to be right. She had only needed to be ready. As medics checked her wounds and the ridge settled into cautious calm, she allowed herself to sit back fully, the earth cool against her spine. Fatigue washed through her in waves, heavy and deserved. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the moment pass through her instead of clinging to it. Somewhere, reports would be written, stories would be shaped. People far from this ridge would hear fragments and simplify them into something easier to swallow. But here, among those who had watched the line almost break and then refused to, the truth remained unpolished and undeniable. She had not held the ridge because she was something unexpected. She had held it because she was prepared. As night approached once more, she took up her watch again, rifle resting across her knees, gaze steady on the darkening valley. Somewhere beyond the horizon, doubt still existed, sneers still waited, old assumptions still breathed. She welcomed them quietly. They had already been answered.